Hi everybody, welcome back to another reading of Whittington. First I want to say that I hope you are all just staying well and healthy. I hope that you're not getting the quarantine blues. I know it's easy to feel kind of discouraged lately, but I hope that you're finding ways to stay happy and healthy and to do what feels right for you some days, to practice self-care, taking care of yourself. Whether that means that you're listening to music a little bit more than usual, or maybe you're watching some fun shows, or maybe it's something entirely different. Maybe you're drawing or creating something. That can always make us feel so good to practically create something, especially if it's something that we can then use or display or see around. I hope that you are giving the people in your house lots of hugs, because I know that we all need those, and I hope you're reading. So, here we go. Here's our next couple of chapters. This is chapter 13. Dick arrives in London. Slowly they crept up on London, and London crept up on them. Remember, this is Whittington telling the story, so I'm doing it in Whittington's voice. First the market gardens, then the smoky outskirts with dumps and stockyards and slaughterhouses, tanneries, fat renderers, rag and bone places, smelters, all the dirty work of a city that the nicer sort of people who live there want to keep out of sight and never smell. London proper, when they finally got into it, was dark and cold. At London Bridge, Dick swung off the carriage with a handshake for Will and a nod to the radish-faced agent. Radish Face gave him a grudging wave and flipped him a penny. By the time he'd left the carriage, Dick knew it wasn't true about the streets of gold. It couldn't be. All those hungry-looking people around. Maybe he had to get away from the river to find the London he'd heard about at home. He walked the London streets for 3 days and never got away from the river and never found so much as a half a penny. He found people poorer than those he'd left at home. Once he'd spent his penny, he begged for food and got kicked for his pains. He nearly starved to death. One evening, he fainted in a doorway he was drawn to by the delicious smell of roasting meat. When he knocked at the door, the cook took her broom to him. He moaned and fainted. In a fury, she hit him with the stick end, but he couldn't stand up. She was shoving his limp body toward the gutter when the merchant whose home it was arrived. He carried the boy inside. I want you to stop and think for a second. What do you think might happen next? Who is this merchant, perhaps? And what might it mean for Dick? We'll continue. By the time Dick slumped down in the merchant's doorway, his clothes were so worn and filthy they weren't worth washing. The cook was sent to borrow an outfit from a surprised neighbor who'd watched her give the broom to that very boy not an hour before. Suddenly, the cat stopped speaking. A rat had crept out after a bit of grain. The lady didn't see it, but the cat did. He tensed, his tail trembling. The lady noticed his tail and guessed what was up. "Wait, Whittington!" she yelled. As the rat dove under a board, the cat drooped like a pitcher called from the mound. "You rat, come back out here," the lady said. "You too, old one, all of you. We're going to have a parley. For the moment, you're safe under my protection." We have a photo, or an image, a drawing of sorts. So, I know my camera's not great right now, but hopefully you can see the beginning of their parley meeting. The cat glowered as rats crept out of their holes and hiding spots around the barn. They gathered at the far edge of the stable, milling and chittering together, all eyes on Whittington. The lady flapped up on a hay bale. The chickens huddled together behind the cat, muttering and watching the rats. "Quiet!" ordered the lady. She turned to the rats. "You know what Whittington can do. He's the law now. If things don't change, sooner or later he'll get all of you. Or we'll figure out a way to get along together. We don't want you taking our grain after we've had our first share. We don't want you going after our chicks and eggs anymore. That's what we want. What do you want in exchange?" The old one spoke. "To be safe from the cat." There was a loud murmur from the rats behind him. "And a share of the grain," he added, "especially in winter when we can't get out." The lady looked at the chickens. "Are those terms okay?" Nobody said anything. "Yes," said the lady. She turned to the cat. Whittington, you're the law, but I'm in charge. I say, if the rats keep their word, we will keep ours. We'll leave them a share of what Bernie puts down, and you won't go after them anymore. There's a lot of play in rats. It would be dull around here without their shows and parties. You'll see. There was a faint cheer from the huddle of rats. The Bantams and Coraggio hummed their surprise. Who knows, the lady continued. Maybe someday the rats will be able to do something like for you, like in the fable. The cat looked up sulkily. What's a fable? A story that tells a truth, she said. One day, a nearsighted rat stumbled over the muzzle of a sleeping lion. His fur tickled the lion's nose and made him sneeze. The lion clumped his paw down on the rat. Please, gasped the rat. I'm sorry. Perhaps if you let me go, I'll live to perform some service for you in the future. Audacity and presumption, snorted the lion. But then he smiled at the idea and lifted his paw. The rat limped off. A year later, the lion got trapped in a hunter's net. It was a strong net, skillfully set. The lion lunged and clawed at the sinews that held him. It held tight. He roared for help. His friends came. Some tried digging under it. Some tried pulling the net apart. No one could help him. The rat came. He knew what to do. He gnawed the cords with his sharp incisors and set the lion free. Thank you, said the lion, shaking himself tidy. Tit for tat, said the rat. Chapter 14. Dick is given a home. School was closed again because of snow. Wonder if anyone can relate to that. Ben was glad. It was a day like Saturday or Sunday when he didn't have the tightness in his throat about having to read. They couldn't get the truck in, so Bernie and the kids pushed their way down to the barn with jugs of steaming water on the brown sled. After skidding the water down, the kids dragged the sled back up and whizzed down, twisting and balancing to take the curve, dragging arms and legs to hold down their speed. They did it a couple of times, shrieking and laughing so hard Bernie came out to watch. My turn, he yelled. He hauled the sled up the hill, sat down, and was off before he was ready, arms and legs akimbo as the ditch spun around and shot him down head first. The sled flipped on the curve and dumped him. The kids rushed to help. He got up slow, wiping snow from his face and hair, out from around his neck. He groped for his hat and tried to laugh. It hurt. The cigar was ruined. It was cold and blowing, the way it gets right after a snow. When it's falling, the sky glows and the air warms up and takes on a spice smell. Once the front has passed, the air clears and the temperature drops. It was bitter that morning. The sky was blue with white streaks. Sounds carried in the cold, dry air. A jay soared, blue on blue. His call sounded like struck metal. Did you bring the book? The lady asked Abby as soon as Bernie was on his way back up the hill. Abby had her Sunday school book. It wasn't the Bible, but it had psalms and parables. First Whittington story, Ben said. The afternoon before, he'd taken a kitchen knife and locked himself in the bathroom. He'd put the knife between his teeth and looked in the mirror. It looked better edge in. He got a small cut at the corner of his mouth. That night he'd dreamed that he was on the road to London with Will and the agent. He had become that scrawny boy in his imagining, deciding on his life. The lady agreed that they could hear the rest of Whittington's story before they learned to read. She figured learning to read and the rest of Whittington's story could be done in a morning. Whittington floated up to his place the way cats jump. He was looking sleeker. Maybe it was the diet of tuna and canned milk. Because it was blowing cold, the lady had the kids pull down extra hay and ordered everyone to lie close together. It took a while to get settled because the chickens snuggling down tickled the horses, and the horses without meaning to shuddered the way they do to drive off flies, which sent the chickens flying. While all this was going on, the rats drew close and entertained themselves playing Chase My Tail and Leapfrog, the next largest over the littlest, and so on, up to the old one who did not jump or chase his tail, but sat, rocking on his haunches, waiting for the story. Once the merchant had the boy fed, washed, and clothed, the cat began. He sat down with Dick and asked him what he could do. Help around. Anyone can help around, the old man said, not unkindly. What can you do that's special? Dick didn't know. He had no skill, no trade. All he owned was his name. He told how he'd begun to learn to read and write. He said he could do small sums. What work did you do at home? The merchant asked. Simpling for my grandmother. She concocted. You know plants? Some. The merchant pressed his thumb against his nose and nodded. That was his way of tucking away something important. Teach me what needs doing, the boy said. I'll do it. He had spirit. He wasn't sorry for himself. He would ask, but he wouldn't whine. The merchant's name was Hugh Fitzwarren. His cook was a small-eyed woman, squat, round-faced, gap-toothed. She wore layers and layers of tops and skirts and kept an apron pan tied to her belt for protection in the streets. She was as much family as what Fitzwarren had. She was not a good cook, and she had a dark temper, but the merchant felt responsible for her. And now he had this boy on his hands. Dick tried to argue how he could be useful to the merchant and his cook, but fatigue and a full stomach overwhelmed him. His head sagged. He fell asleep on the table. Fitzwarren carried him to his own bed. He summoned his cook for a talk. She was told to feed the boy back to strength. He gave her money to buy him clothes. He added that she might scold, but she was never to beat him again. If the boy was so bad as to deserve beating, Fitzwarren said he'd turn him out. But he was not to be hit. The merchant was all against beating and flogging, although most children were beaten in his time. Fitzwarren was comfortable, not rich. He was a cloth merchant. He wore the livery of his guild, a long velvet coat, the deep green color of sea moss. What's a guild? Abby asked. A group of merchants chartered to carry on a particular business. No one but a guild member could practice that trade. The guild set standards of quality. Fitzwarren was a member of the Mercer's Company. Mercers dealt in cloth and fabric. He imported small quantities of precious fabrics and sold English woolens abroad. Wool was the great product of England then, raw and woven. England's wools were the standard of the world. Her fortunes depended on it. Even so, English people of quality liked to flaunt fine silks, brocades, and satins, glowing velvets, flashing taffetas. The gentry were the merchants' principal customers. Fitzwarren's shop smelled of new wool and spices. Along with fabrics, as agent for a friend who was a member of the Pepperers and Spicers Guild, he did a small, steady business in remainders of spice shipments he was offered by ship captains when he was on the docks seeing to his other cargoes. He bought pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmegs, and cardamoms, along with pure white rock salt mined in Germany. For pleasure, Fitzwarren bought the strange roots, slips, seeds, bulbs, and plants that captains, mates, and sometimes sailors had for sale on their return from foreign lands. He was always handy with money in his pocket when a ship docked. He gardened for flowers and sweet smells. He had exotics in his garden, clove-smelling gillyflowers, peaches he raised against the wall from pits carried up the Silk Road from China by the traders, tulips from Turkey, daffodils, salad greens grown under glass for his table year-round. Few ate salads in his time. He had a bush from the Orient whose berries were said to make goats drunk, and a scarlet French strawberry with gold dots like the Queen's robe. There were things in his beds that never came to flower because the London sun didn't burn long and hot enough. His garden was strange-looking. The plants tucked helter-skelter in long raised beds edged with cowshins and knucklebones. Violets, periwinkles, and tiny hyacinths carpeted the narrow paths. He might have made things handsome and patterned like his neighbors had he ever stood back and looked at it all as a garden. He never did. He was always hunched over one plant or another. One evening, in the garden, Fitzwarren asked Dick if he recognized any of the plants. "Oh, yes, sir. The celandine there for sore throat when boiled with wine. The catmint. My grandmother would honey the young tops into a conserve for nightmares. The green hellebore she concocted into a potion for worming children. Again, Fitzwarren pressed his thumb against his nose. It's kind of an interesting quirk, that. We do have another picture here. So I hope you can see that. That's Dick in the Garden with Fitzwarren, the merchant. We're going to stop there for today, and we will continue with chapter 15 tomorrow. I hope that you are enjoying reading this. If there have any issues kind of accessing this or anything like that, or for any questions or comments, feel free to comment in our remote learning group and discuss what you think about the book so far. I'll repost links there. And if there's anything else that you're reading that you want to talk about, feel free to email or comment. And then go ahead and subscribe to this channel maybe so that you can see the new chapters as they come up. All right, stay cool, you guys.